Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. And as we're set to deliberate the latest developments here in Israel, throughout the region and beyond, with chief focus, of course, on the Lebanese file, on prospects of maybe even reaching a cessation of hostilities or a sort of outline for the Gaza Strip, the Islamic Republic of Iran, and much more, it's always important to remember how the war began. 419 days ago, on October 7th of last year, the Islamist Hamas and its terror affiliates in the Gaza Strip had launched an onslaught on southern Israel, declaring war by perpetrating a massacre, murdering some 1,200 mostly civilians, wounding over 4,800 others, and kidnapping some 250 people, including elderly, men, women, children, and infants. 101 of them remain in Hamas captivity to date. The subsequent day, on October 8th of last year, Iran essentially joined the war by greenlighting its proxy in Lebanon, Hezbollah, to launch cross-border attacks into Israel. Hezbollah since then had launched over 13,000 munitions towards Israeli territory, and not Hezbollah alone. Additional proxies from Syria, from Iraq, and Yemen have all launched various projectiles towards the state of Israel, including Iran proper. And with that, I'd like to turn to central Israel, where we're joined by the commander of the Israeli Air Force Task Force for Air and Missile Defense, Brigadier General in Reserve Doron Kavish. It's good to see you, General. I'd like to immediately ask you on whether or not the ceasefire is indeed sustaining itself, being enforced by the IDF, of course. We hear reports of over 6 or 7 Hezbollah terror operatives eliminated over the last 24 hours alone. Another 4 or 5 have been apprehended for interrogation, and a couple of drones have also launched warning fire towards vehicles entering into demilitarized zones under the outline of the agreement. Some casualties reported. Give us a little bit of an update on the variables of it all.
Well, Jonathan, this is a great question because the sustainability of this agreement, this is the big question. We all hope that it would work, but it would be very hard to make sure that it's going to work. And this is, I would say, something that within the IDF and the Israeli defense establishment, there is a lot of discussions how to make sure that, at least from the Israeli point of view, we make sure that we are enforcing it. And this is what we are seeing in the last 48 hours, I could say. There were some, as you said, some terrorists that try to maybe check the defenses, maybe for any other reason they decided to come to those areas that they are not authorized to. And yesterday it was with some artillery. Today it was with UAV, and the last one was struck by Israeli fixed wing, meaning that this is a signal from the IDF that we are not going to allow such a thing. And if it could be someone who is walking or some other terrorist who is doing some other activities from the Israeli point of view. If it is either of them, they would be struck because they are penetrating areas that they are not allowed. So, and this is only for the very short parameter of 3 kilometers close to the Israeli border. We have to remember that the IDF issued a map to the Lebanese in order to make sure that they understand where they can't go. But this is not really the main question. The main question would be the rearmament of the Hezbollah, the Iranians that would try to send arms toward Syria to the Hezbollah. The Hezbollah really to enforce that they would be demilitarized south of the Litani River. There is a lot of very challenging, I would say, part of this agreement, and enforced of them. This is super important. The last thing that I would add is that I think that the Israeli activities for the last 48 hours, this is also something that it is important for the agreement itself and the enforcement powers that are going to be there. Some of it US, French, Lebanese, and others. That everyone would have to see that Israel is fully alert and is going to strike if someone is going to do something in order to arm this agreement.
Indeed. Well, let's turn to Madrid, Spain, where we're joined by Dr. Rafael Bardaji, formerly Spain's national security advisor, currently CEO of Worldwide Strategy. It's great to see you, Rafael. I'd like
My
to
pleasure.
immediately ask you about a couple of angles to this ceasefire. The first one, a Lebanese member of parliament of the Hezbollah faction, Hamdallah, who repeatedly says, we're not bound by any concessions, we're not bound by the American outline, and we continue to be present along the border in every house in southern Lebanon, in every location, and we will continue to pursue the direction of resistance, as he puts it. While on the other hand, we're hearing Amos Hochstein, the U.S. Special Envoy, who repeatedly claims, that this cessation of hostilities is a permanent ceasefire. It's not about 60 days. It is about going for the long haul. Nevertheless, what I'm hearing in Washington and elsewhere, there is a lot of skepticism about the sustainability of the situation.
Well, Jonathan, indeed, no, I think if you look back, what we are now is the enforcement of Resolution 1701, who was passed almost 20 years ago. No? That could make anyone quite skeptic about the sustainability of any agreement in the region and between Hezbollah and Lebanon and Israel. The second thing is important to bear in mind is that, yes, for the ceasefire, there is a political and diplomatic angle here. No? I know that the American administration, the living one, the Biden administration, wanted to stop the military operations in the north as soon as possible, putting some pressure on the Israeli government to reach a deal on the ceasefire. And I also am aware that the incumbent the incoming President Trump is also inclined to believe that he would like to start without any open conflict on January 20th. So the pressures were there from the American angle. The pressures were there also from the European Union, who were pushing for sanctioning Israel if the violence was kept open. So that's something that we all have to take into consideration. But obviously, there are also military angle here as well, no, and reasons. And the issue will be how to reconcile both sides, the diplomatic and the military, that the goals of the war was achieved, no, or is achieved and is sustained. Sincerely, I think if you look at the picture as a fixed photography, what Hezbollah was able to do 2 months ago was much more than what it may be able to do in a couple of weeks. But nonetheless, we also learned in the region that the reconstitution of human power is very easily for the enemies of Israel, from Hamas to Hezbollah to Iran, on Iraqi militias, on the Syria. And the key question will be the capacity to rearm and to reconstruct the fire capability. And that Israel has full control of the routes of replenishing Hezbollah from Iran through Syria. So I think that's the key question in order to make this ceasefire sustainable in the near future.
Indeed, particularly in countries, in failed states where the governance is lacking, and therefore local communities, clans, tribes are very much reliant on those type of terror organizations that are able to gain the influx of funds from the Islamic Republic of Iran, and therefore also sustain their control over very significant territories. But let's now turn to Washington, D.C., where we're joined by retired Brigadier General Mark Emmett, formerly an Assistant Secretary of State for Political and Military Affairs. It's good to see you, General. I'd like to hear your take on the latest, but also the ceasefire arrangement or the papers that were outlining the various terms and conditions for the implementation of this cessation of hostilities included two separate papers. The one, of course, between the state of Lebanon and Israel, the second one between Israel and the United States. Now, I'd like to speak about the one between Washington and Jerusalem, since it's quite evident that the core reason for Israel to accept the arrangement is an American commitment to stand with Israel in the face of Iran's aspirations to attain nuclear weapon capabilities and to pursue a joint endeavor to confront that threat. What can you tell us about that? And in what context is that merely less than 2 months before the next administration takes office?
Well, I am a bit reluctant to even give that document any credibility, simply because it has always been the U.S. policy, both in the Trump administration and in the Biden administration, that Iran will not get a nuclear weapon. That has never been a commitment as much as an aspiration. It's great to have a policy, but if you have nothing behind that policy but aspirational intentions, I don't necessarily think much of that document. It's not a mutual defense treaty. It's not an Article 5 like NATO treaty where an attack on one is an attack on both. Again, the term I used yesterday, this is has more the whiff of legacy than it does of diplomacy. I think it's even further stated by this document. And again, let's be quite candid. That's a 45-day document, and on January 20th, that document, like every other document, executive order signed by the president, is up for changing by President Trump, and I would suspect it will.
General Gavish, your take on that?
Well, Jonathan, this is, of course, a big question. What would be during the transition between the governments? I think that if we are looking at it from the Israeli angle, Iran is the focus. Iran was the focus, and now it is even more the focus of Israel, a weapon of mass destruction, but not only. We saw in the last year Iran being the destabilizer of this region. We saw it in the past, but I think that now, even more than in the past, we see the difference between Iran having capabilities and now we see also intentions. We have to remember that they shot toward Israel more than overall 500 projectiles during this war. We didn't have it in the past. So looking into the future, we cannot just keep it in the history. This is something that we'd have to lead us as a torch, that we have to make sure that Iran never would come to its capabilities or its desire for weapons of destructions, weapon of mass destruction, and hopefully United States and the Western world would be there not only by signing paper, but also by doing activities which are relevant to it. By the way, not everything is military. There are also other options. The Trump administration did it in the past. I think that if he would decide that this could be happening also in the future, all kinds of different means which could be relevant in order to press the Iranians.
Dr. Barraki?
Well, I think, yes, Iran is, at the end of the day, the dark hand that moves everything in the region against Israel, and at some point has to be tackled with. I'm skeptical of the policy based almost exclusively in economic sanctions. I think sanctions are good, but are not enough, and unless you have real military capabilities and actions, Iran will pursue his path to a nuclear arsenal sooner than later. They have been doing that even with sanctions for 25 or 30 years now, and they will continue with new sanctions. The world has changed since President Trump left the White House. Now there is this unofficial alliance between Moscow, Tehran, Pyongyang, and Beijing. And with those actors aligned in the same axis, Iran has too many capabilities to escape any control or live with any sanction that the Western world, the northern part of the Western world, will imply. Even the South, like Brazil and other countries, even India, may find difficult to follow the new sanction regime that may be enforced by the Trump administration.
Indeed, unless, of course, we do see the reimposition of the snapback sanctions, which are set to expire in October of 2025.
Yes, of course. But again, I think the world has changed, and there is a new divide between the North and the South that has been growing since the Russians invaded Ukraine, and also during the month of the Gaza intervention by Israel against Hamas. No? And I'm not sure that everyone will be on board of the sanctions that are required and needed to prevent Iran to become nuclear. I think we have reached a point where there is no other option than consider some kind of actions that are not limited to economic sanctions.
Indeed. Well, General Kimmel, I'd like to hear your input on this as well, but also if you may expand from your perspective, is this the final window of opportunity to utilize strong power to confront Iran's nuclear belligerence? And if so, what would the calculus be?
Two things. I would say the most encouraging thing coming in with the Trump administration is Marco Rubio and Mike Waltz as Secretary of State and National Security Advisor. Both of them are strong China hawks. And look, I think we've got to acknowledge that one of the ways that Iran is continue to prop up economically is by allowing China to double the amount of production and purchase of Iranian oil products. That's one of the major ways to slow things down as a successful economic sanction, is just make sure you start sanctioning those that are supposed to be sanction Iran, and they're not, the sanctions busters. The second thing, I think the nuance with President Trump may be, I think, taking a page out of the book on what we suspect will be his Ukraine policy. He's not going to say, end the war. If Zelensky wants to continue to fight the war, I suspect that President Trump will allow him to continue to do that, and possibly might even provide further equipment. But most likely he will say, I'm not going to provide anything more, but if the Europeans want to do that, that's fine. So I think he will not completely sanction Europe if they don't want to end the war, but he'll say, okay, over to you.
Indeed.
And it may well be that he gives that same sort of license to Israel, saying, look, we are not going to be flying F-35 side by side with you into Israel, into Iran. But if you guys want to do it on your own, yeah, we'll provide a little bit of support, perhaps the critical support that is needed, but just don't expect us to fly alongside of you. If that happens, it won't happen immediately. I think President Trump will more than likely try to start his maximum pressure campaign again, see how it works, possibly sanction the sanction busters. But I don't think that in the next few years, if this path continues that Iran is taking, that President Trump will not stop anyone or fail to prevent anyone that wants to take out the Iranian nuclear capability.
I agree, unless the Iranians defy President Trump's demands, which will undoubtedly come at some point to reinvigorate some type of diplomacy in the terms and conditions which are dictated by the Trump administration, as was the case, of course, in the previous round when the Trump administration pretty much said, we're withdrawing from the agreement, but we would like to push for a renegotiated deal. The Iranians rejected that, and the maximum campaign campaign or pressure campaign followed. So there are, of course, prerequisites to certain developments that may evolve. But we don't have very much time left, and I'd like still to touch on a couple of countries. General Gavish, we're seeing a push from Idlib by Tahrir al-Sham and other jihadist organizations who've launched an attack against the Russians, against the Syrian army, as well as the RGC and its proxies operating alongside the Assad regime. Israel obviously looks very closely at those developments and understands that there is a certain potential for a broader escalation in that region. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I think that, one of the lessons learned that we've learned during the history is that we should be humble until to the point how much can we shape everything in the Mediterranean. I think in this point also we have to look and see what exactly are what exactly is happening here, and to see, of course, from the Israeli point of view, what could be the implication toward our strategy and toward our defense. I would add, Jonathan, that, we're talking about Iran. Maybe I'm going back for a second to the point that we just talked about. We have to remember that the Houthis, the Iraqians, and other proxies of the Iranians are still active. So from the Israeli point of view, the war is not done yet. And we didn't talk a word about the south part of Israel, the return of the hostages. So it is very important to understand that from Israel point of view, we still have a way to go. It is not everything about the north, unfortunately. It started in the south, and it would have to end in the south.
Indeed. Dr. Bardahi, let's look on the southern front. The belligerence by the Houthis is still disrupting maritime shipping in the strategic Strait of Bab el-Mandeb and the adjacent waterways. They have announced, alongside Hashd al-Shaabi in Iraq, that they are not bound by any ceasefire and will continue so long as the Iranians dictate those directives. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I think they are still pursuing the strategy of Iran to impose cost to the sea lines of communications. No? But I'm quite confident that the new American administration will address the situation in Bab el-Mandeb with a different lens and probably with a different attitude, and things will start changing there rapidly. Unfortunately, I think if the Houthis and the Iranians pursue the same path as in the last months, they will have to face severe military consequences. But I'm sure that there are people in the Pentagon and in the new White House thinking how to redress the terrible and stupid situation we have allowed to unfold.
Indeed. General Kimmett, your take on that, and if you may also give a little bit of insight as to the state of play in Iraq. You have roughly 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes to do so.
Yeah, two things I'd say. Number one, I'm humorously noting that we have another H in the group. Not only Houthis, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Hashid. Now we have Hayat Tahrir al-Sham in Syria, starting to act up again. I think it's important to recognize it is not always the case that the enemy of our enemy is our friend. Yes, they're fighting against the Syrian regime, but if you don't like Bashar al-Assad in power in Syria, you really won't like HTS in charge. They're an Al-Qaeda affiliate, declared terrorist organization, and I certainly hope no country decides to work with them against Bashar al-Assad.
Absolutely. I can't agree with you more, since al-Julani, who is the leader of this terror group, is the field commander, or used to be the field commander of Al-Qaeda under Zawahiri's favorite during the days of Jabhat al-Nusra, when he led that terror group. So, of course, all Western nations should join together in confronting this threat, irrespective of the fact that they are fighting our enemies as well. In one sentence of all of you, what are we to focus on for the next couple of days ahead? General Gavish, we'll start with you, and very briefly, please, one sentence.
Looking to the north and to reinforce the agreement that we know that is there.
Dr. Bardahi?
Yes, keeping the ceasefire in place, but also start looking how to put an end in the war in the south as soon as possible.
General Kimmett?
In a very quick interview last night, Amish Hochstein validated, to my mind, the weakness of the agreement when he said he does not expect the LAF to be in southern Lebanon in full strength for 18 months. Very, very concerning development.
Indeed, something that, of course, Israel has taken note of, and IDF Chief of General Staff Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi has highlighted his instruction to the IDF to prepare for the moment when this ceasefire may collapse and to engage as such once again with the engines of war recuperating into a position of offense. But this is all the time that we have today. I'd like to immediately thank General Kimmett, Dr. Bardahi, and General Gavish for all of your insights. I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next update, from here in Jerusalem, wishing you a good day.
Shalom, I'm Danny Ayalon, former Israeli ambassador to the United States, former deputy foreign minister and member of Knesset. Today, I'm very privileged to be hosting TV7's Middle East Review and also being a panelist of the various shows of TV7, which I find the most enlightening, most educating if you really want to understand the world, the global scene as well as the regional scene of the Middle East. It is worthwhile to watch TV7.
Israel today is in a totally different strategic situation.
Iran wants to use Syria. Russia is trying to save Assad.
Now we have the backing of the Gulf countries.
We need to keep the credible military threat out there.
This is TV7 Middle East Review.